Welcome back to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and in today's brief episode, I'm going to provide some context and analysis to reports that Hamas is going bankrupt and that it cannot pay its fighters, what this means for the context of the war, and if this means an end is near. But before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe to the Philos Project channel. So this news broke last week. It was viral on X, and many people were providing their analysis. I had the pleasure and the honor of being interviewed by the Christian Post in this article, Hamas in Financial Crisis, Too Broke to Pay Fighters. And a quote from my interview was downstream of strong foreign policy. So in this article, I essentially highlight the context needed to understand why it is today Hamas is financially diminished and why it matters, and also kind of a warning that this does not mean an immediate end to this conflict. Okay, so let's zoom out. Let's go back to 2023. In the summer of 2023, the Biden administration engaged in what I think history will look back on as some of the most disastrous foreign policy with Iran in an attempt to get a nuclear deal, which was the legacy of the Obama administration, which of course Joe Biden was the vice president of. I think he was seeking to kind of relive that glory for his administration. The aim was to get a nuclear deal. But that fell apart. And what ended up happening was a prisoner exchange between the US and Iran, and the United States unfreezing assets that amounted to $16 billion in total back to the Iranian regime. So there was those sanction waivers, and then the Biden administration also waived the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration's first term, allowing Iran to sell oil to China, which of course empowers the regime even further with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into its economy, which then funds its conflicts and wars across the region. We see with the Houthis and also with Hamas in the Israel-Hamas war. So the Biden administration engages in this disastrous foreign policy, and the Iranian regime, which is a single export economy, relies on its oil sales, was economically empowered, but it was also diplomatically empowered. The horrific foreign policy, in addition to the horrific, the word horrific only can describe the entire Biden administration's foreign policy, specifically in the Middle East, but the withdrawal from Afghanistan signaled a window of opportunity for the Iranian regime. They were looking towards the 2024 US presidential election and knew that a potential change in the US administration would signal maybe an end to that window of opportunity. So immediately after the 2023 summer talks between the US and Iran, we have October 7th happen. Again, because the Iranian regime was diplomatically empowered and appeased, and they were also economically empowered, so they could fund a war. They could sustain a longer conflict than a short spat of fire going back and forth between Hamas and Israel, which was what historically had been happening. We saw kind of a spike in tensions back in 2021 as well. And so it was a window of opportunity. Then we have the Trump administration, and this signaled an end to that window of opportunity. And the Trump administration reinstated its maximum pressure campaign on the Iranian regime. So we see sanctions now constraining their economy again. They cannot export their oil. And we see a policy shift, which is a no tolerance for terrorism policy, where the Biden administration conditioned aid to Israel to restrain its counteroffensive in Gaza. The Trump administration has said, we're not going to do that. We're going to equip you militarily, and we're going to allow you to continue that offensive without any constraints. So we need to remember, this was never a war Hamas could win. Hamas was benefiting from the international anti-Israel campaign that greatly restrained Israel's ability to engage in its just war aims. And they had two war aims: to bring the hostages home and to eliminate and delegitimize Hamas. We've had a series of ceasefires fall through, such as the one at the beginning of this year. And now we see the Trump administration giving Netanyahu a green light. We've had Netanyahu come to the White House, I believe, twice since the start of the Trump administration's second term. Okay, so we see a shift in U.S. foreign policy. We now have Hamas's key funder, Iran, constrained economically, diplomatically, and we also have Israel now blockading aid into Gaza. So we have three streams of income for Hamas. We have Iran directly. We also have UNRWA, which we had UNRWA funding frozen under the Biden administration. The Trump administration has continued that policy and also gone a step further and withdrawn from the U.S. Human Rights Council. And then its third stream of funding, or its third kind of maybe robust stream of funding, is in aid. So aid going into Gaza is taken by Hamas and not distributed amongst the Palestinian population there, but it is taken and then sold to the Palestinian population there. It is Hamas's single economy within the Gaza Strip, which is the selling of aid. Remember, there is no free economy in the Gaza Strip. Hamas relies on the international aid and they sell that back to the Palestinian people. So we see these three substantial streams of income for Hamas coming to a halt, which has now significantly economically diminished the organization. Another consideration to take a look at is Israel's high precision campaign to eliminate top Hamas and Hezbollah officials, which they have done with incredible precision, which I think highlights the capabilities of Israel, which again far outpace Hamas. If we look at the capabilities of Israel and we look at the capabilities of Hamas, we see that Hamas has to rely on terrorism and attrition and decentralized terrorism in order to sustain this conflict, because their capabilities are greatly diminished from that of Israel. And so this was never a war that Hamas could win. And we see a pressure on the organization now with the Trump administration, diminished funds, and also a policy of we don't negotiate with terrorism coming from both the United States and Israel. So does this mean an end to the conflict is soon? There is going to be an end to this conflict in which Hamas does not come out the victor. And I'm sure there's going to be even more international pressure as Israel continues its counteroffensive into Gaza. It's going to require some sort of population transfer within Gaza. We also have the complex network of terror tunnels, which is bigger than the entire New York City subway system, which Israel still has to identify and navigate. And then we also have the reality that despite any financial and leadership crisis that Hamas might be struggling with, is that defunding Hamas is not going to eliminate the ideology that is Hamas. Hamas is an idea which is prevalent amongst the Palestinian population in Gaza, especially the youth population. And so while financial constraints might signal an end to this immediate conflict, we have to remember, and the West has to remember, to not underestimate Hamas and understand that Hamas is not just an organization, but an ideology, the latter of which is going to be a lot harder to eliminate with just defunding. And it is actually the grievances created by economic hardship and opportunity that incentivizes terrorism amongst the huge youth population in the Gaza Strip. So a next day policy or plan for the end of this conflict and war, whether it happens tomorrow or in 6 months from now, is going to have to deal with eliminating Hamas as an ideology and also figure out a way to provide the Palestinian population within Gaza economic opportunity, because again, it is the economic hardship of the Palestinian youth and the lack of employment opportunities that incentivizes engagement with terrorism. So the defunding of Hamas could unintentionally incentivize further terrorism. And so on that bleak note, I'm going to leave you. I encourage you to read the entire article. It is interesting to think that maybe Hamas being defunded could result in an end to this conflict coming soon. But again, as I stated, I think we have a lot longer and a much more difficult task ahead in combating the ideology that is Hamas, because we see it even on our own university campuses here in the United States. And it's the axis of chaos being Iran, Russia, and China that is leaning into that chaos in the West, because it's ultimately leading to internal destruction. And so our enemies abroad are winning on that front. So on the front of ideas and ideologies, we have a lot more work to do. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Next week, we have some really exciting news, so I hope you tune in. Again, I'm going to link the article that I was interviewed in down below, along with a Wall Street Journal article that covers this kind of developing news that Hamas is going bankrupt. And for further analysis, please follow us on Instagram and X, and I'll see you next week.